that probably has more details because this was just an excerpt. The Times reporting the rather unusual, somewhat embarrassing detail that they misused the National Security Situation Room to spin Epstein. The response here, instead of shoot the messenger, it's find the leaker, a reported massive leak probe into who might have been talking to those journalists.
So if you were wondering why there were so many distractions, maybe it was to avert your eyes from this piece. The New York Times article just revealed what we basically all knew, that they were trying to cover up and stop the release of the Epstein files. I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene told us as much, that Trump said that it can't be released because people he knows, his friends, are going to get hurt.
Pam Bondi, she serves at the pleasure of the president and his administration, and those there are telling her, here's who you can prosecute. No, don't do this. I mean, they told her that the Epstein files, that fight to release the Epstein files came directly from President Trump. And I know a lot of people have a hard time with that, but that is the truth. He fought the hardest to stop these files from being released. And the only reason that he signed our bill that we passed in the House was because he had to. It became a massive political problem. Biggest political miscalculation in Donald Trump's career was calling this a hoax, fighting the release of it, and having Mike Johnson, the speaker, refuse to bring the bill to the floor, to the point where Thomas Massie, myself, Nancy Mason, Lauren Boebert actually had to vote with all of the Democrats to get it released.
And of course, Trump doesn't actually care about anybody else. So it really was about him getting hurt. Well, the White House was so worried about him getting worse that they literally were in the Situation Room. But it wasn't even just the White House. I mean, we had the White House, the Department of Justice, and the FBI collude together to figure out how to stop information from getting released that would be harmful to the president. That is corruption. That is collusion. And no wonder, because the New York Times piece talks about allegations of some really disturbing details. I mean, the more we see about Trump and the Epstein files, the more disturbing it gets. I mean, of course, a lot that's in the Epstein files has not been corroborated because the law enforcement never really did their jobs. I mean, they're still not doing their jobs. The Department of Justice and FBI, instead of hearing these accounts by these girls, didn't say, well, let's go investigate. They said, let's stop this from getting out. But the fact of the matter is that more that gets out about Epstein and Trump in those files, the more disturbed I am and the more disturbed we are, not the other way around. So no wonder they're in that Situation Room trying to come up with some sort of plot to keep us all, the American people, in the dark about how bad this is. And frankly, we haven't even finished seeing the Epstein files. So who knows what else is in there?
For the very first time, we have the Vice President of the United States, who we now know has been involved in directing strategy on this massive cover-up from the Situation Room. The top administration officials, the Vice President, the White House Chief of Staff, the Director of the FBI, the Attorney General, top communications staff are sitting around the Situation Room planning strategy on how to cover up the Epstein files. They're talking strategy on how to ensure that Donald Trump is not accused of anything, that his name does not appear. They're talking strategy on how to possibly get Ghislaine Maxwell a pardon, or what that would look like. They're actually the Vice President suggested that Tucker Carlson should interview Ghislaine Maxwell to exonerate Donald Trump. This is for us. We now know that the Vice President and Vice President Vance has been directly involved in this massive cover-up. So for us, that is critical information. And we're going to be asking James Comer, we've done it already, but we're going to be asking formally here in the next day. We have to speak to Vice President Vance. We have to speak to Susie Wiles. We have to speak to Kash Patel, because they are having meetings in the Situation Room about covering up the Epstein files and protecting Donald Trump. And so this is, to us, a huge smoking gun as it relates to what the Vice President is doing in the Situation Room.
Perhaps the most important thing to do in order to actually end the Iran war is to release the Epstein files. Because when we see how serious they are about trying to not get those Epstein files released, you really do wonder how much is a distraction, how far they are willing to go. I mean, perhaps the most important thing for our national security is to get those files out, because it is true that when Trump starts striking locations, when we kill school children, we are distracted. We are focusing on these very important issues of whether or not we're committing war crimes, whether or not we're allowing Bibi Netanyahu to commit war crimes. This does distract us from the Epstein files. Trump had to capitulate on his pick for Director of National Intelligence because Congress, for the first time ever, didn't extend FISA. Who knows whether or not this next national intelligence person would have any independent thought and be willing to care about security. But if he did care about national security, the release of the Epstein files would be his number one job, because the more we see it, the more apparent it seems that there were intelligence agencies here and perhaps multiple other countries involved. And whether or not our president and the White House, the Department of Justice and FBI care so much about covering this up, what they are willing to do or not do to cover up is something that we all need to know. So release the Epstein files. That should be the job, the number one job of the next Director of National Intelligence.
Among these new files is a list compiled by the FBI just in August of numerous salacious and, to be really clear, unverified allegations about President Trump. Why did the FBI create this list last year, and have all of these claims been investigated by the DOJ?
So look, it's not about President Trump. It's about a ton of people, multiple people that were, quote, in the Epstein files. And what I think folks will see when they review the materials we released is that there have been hundreds of calls made to the FBI where allegations are made by either anonymous individuals or people who are very quickly determined to not be credible, whether it's the nature of what they're saying or the fact they won't provide any information or corroboration. And that's part of the Epstein files. So go ahead.
I understand that. But the fact that you created a list, the FBI created a list about the allegations against President Trump, it is certainly noteworthy. I mean, he's a sitting president. And the question is whether or not the DOJ, but the question is, and I'm not saying that they're verified at all, and that's what my question is to you. Did you look into what you have on those lists?
Yes, of course, but what you're not being fair in that question, because that index, that list you're talking about, was not just President Trump. It was all kinds of individuals, other politicians, other, quote, famous people, where we wanted to understand, okay, there were members of Congress that were accusing us of hiding things, which we're not doing and which we haven't done. And so we wanted to understand why and where that was coming from. And it turns out there was a number of claims made by either, like I said, anonymous people or somebody, for example, calling and saying, I used to have a roommate who told me this sensational story. So just, obviously that's not something that can be really investigated, right? What's your roommate's name? I don't remember. Right. So that's what that's about. I don't appreciate it being directed towards Donald J. Trump, because that pushes a narrative that is completely false. There are all kinds of people that are mentioned in the quote Epstein files that we had to look at and run down.
Yeah, no, I understand. He is the only sitting president who we're talking about.
It's also just so depraved that in the New York Times reporting, when they're talking in the Situation Room about really disturbing allegations of Trump and a young girl and what he's doing to her body and abusing her body, that their number one thought is how to protect Trump, not we need to get to the bottom of this. The Epstein survivors get completely lost. The Epstein survivors have had no justice for so many years because the people involved are so powerful. At the end of the day, the rest of us need to keep our attention on the Epstein survivors. It is the only way that they can maybe get some measure of justice.
The truth is more important than ever. Check out our new Truth Over Lies collection at store.MeidasTouch.com. All 100% USA union made.